Previously, we derived the price consumption curve and the demand curve. In this video, we will see how to derive the income consumption curve and angle curve. The consumer behavior theory is helping us to understand how consumption responds to factors such as prices of goods and consumers' income. The income consumption curve and the angle curve adds more information to that. Let us consider a good that is a normal good. Recall the definition of normal good. Good X is considered a normal good in economics if we see that consumer is buying more quantity of X as his or her income is increasing, and similarly consumer is buying less of that good when income decreases. You can think of as many examples as you can that satisfy this type of a relationship. Inferior good, on the other hand, shows an inverse relation between the good and the consumer's income. That is, if the consumer's income increases, the consumer would buy less of that good, and if the consumer's income decreases, then the consumer will buy more of that good. Now, whether a good is normal or inferior entirely depends on how the consumer consumes as his or her income changes. A good may be a normal good to consumer 1, but it may not be a normal good. It may be an inferior good to consumer 2. Let us first consider the case of a normal good and try to use the consumer equilibrium graph to derive the income consumption curve and the angle curve. For a normal good, then, so note what we have on this graph on the top panel. So let's name this budget line AB. Okay? So this budget line has the slope, which is the price ratio. Okay, and recall that when you drew the budget line in the previous chapter, then these intercepts are the consumer's income over PX, and this vertical intercept was I over PY. Okay, so if the consumer's income, if I increases, then what happens to the budget line? Then the budget line shifts out. Okay, so AB corresponds to some level of income, let's say I0. Okay, given this budget line and this indifference curve U0, the consumer equilibrium is at E, okay, where the consumer is buying X0 units of X. We are ignoring Y for the time being because we are going to focus on one good at a time. So as I increases to I1, then we have a new budget line corresponding to this new income I1. Note that prices don't change. PX is the same. Okay, so there is no change in the slope. The budget line shifts out in a parallel way. Okay, no change in slope. If the price ratio does not change, the slope will not change. But if income changes, the budget line will shift out. So this budget line corresponds to a higher level of income I1. Okay, and here the equilibrium is obtained at point F for a higher indifference curve U1. Similarly, for further shifts, further increases in income, the budget line will shift out again in a parallel way since price is not changing. So this third, the uppermost budget line, corresponds to even higher income level, let's say I2, and we have a new equilibrium. So note what is happening to the consumption of X. It is increasing. Okay, now let's look at Y. Right, so here at E, the consumer's equilibrium had Y0 units of Y. At the new on the new budget line with higher income, it increases to Y1, and with the newer, again another budget line, it increases to Y2. So we we have these three different budget lines corresponding to three different income levels. And by income, I mean nominal income I. Okay, that is the monthly salary. It could be the monthly salary of the consumer or monthly wages. So when that increases, this is how we show what happens to the consumer's consumption bundles if he or she is maximizing utility given the budget constraint, and for a normal good. Okay, so now we have these three equilibrium points. Okay, if we want to join these points with a curve, right? So it starts here. You can start from, this is known as the income consumption curve. Okay, so the income consumption curve shows equilibrium combinations of goods X and Y. Equilibrium combination meaning the consumer is maximizing utility subject to budget constraint as the consumer's income increases. So that the income consumption curve traces that path. Now from this graph, let's derive what is known as the angle curve. Okay, the angle curve shows the relationship between quantity consumed of a good and the level of income of that consumer. So from here we have the following information. So at E, okay, the equilibrium quantity of X is X0, right? At F, the equilibrium quantity of X is X1, and at G, the equilibrium quantity of X is X2. Note that X0 corresponds to I0 income, which is the lowest, so the lowest budget line, right? So this is I0 and X1, so this is a combination. X1 corresponds to a higher level of income I1, so this second budget line, which is higher than the first one, and so this is X1, and X2 corresponds to this third budget line with I2 level of income, which is the highest. Okay, so these are income and consumption, income and consumption of particular good, that combination. So when you join these points, okay, what you get is known as the angle curve. So for a normal good, the angle curve is upward sloping. You can do the same exercise here. Okay, here we have an inferior good, that is the second definition. As consumers' income is increasing, so this budget line shifts up, but the consumer is consuming less and less X. So X, consumption of X is actually falling, right, from X0 to X1 to X2. So these are the different indifference curves. Okay, so if you join these points, then so start from the origin. Okay, so this is the ICC. So income consumption curve for an inferior good is backward bending like that. And how does the angle curve look like? So remember, these are higher levels of income, right? These budget lines. So we have I0, I1, I2, and note what happens to X in case of inferior good. So I0, X consumed was X0, I1, consumption of X decreases, higher income, less consumption because this is an inferior good, and finally this is X2. Okay, so here if we join these points, then so this is the angle curve for an inferior good. Okay, so angle curve is downward sloping for an inferior good. So note that here we are not changing the prices of the goods. All we are doing is changing income and looking at what happens to consumption. So here are two other new concepts, the income consumption curve and the angle curve. So study the price consumption curve and the demand curve and then compare the two and understand the differences between them.